My mother called me the rock of the family for 34 years, but what she really meant was that I was the structure she leaned on while quietly selling pieces of me behind my back. My name is Helena Ensley, I'm 34. And the night I mailed my parents a certified legal no-contact letter, my phone lit up with 47 missed calls from my mother, none of which I answered, and the final voicemail ended with 7 words she had never said before. "You'll regret this. We made you," and I replied with 4 words. That felt like a lifetime breaking open, then I'm unmaking it. And that moment was not sudden or dramatic, but the result of a quiet unraveling that began days earlier when a bank declined my home loan application and told me my credit score was 487 with 9 delinquent accounts. Numbers that didn't belong to the life I had carefully built, and as I sat in my car in a cold parking garage scrolling through a 43-page credit report, I saw accounts opened when I was still a teenager, balances totaling over $147,000, all tied to my parents' address, and in that moment I didn't cry because the truth was too precise for emotion. It was clinical, documented, undeniable. And when I called my mother, she deflected with soft panic disguised as concern. But in the background, my father said the sentence that confirmed everything: "I told you she'd find out," and something inside me shifted permanently because silence is not innocence. Silence is participation stretched over time, and that night at Daniel's kitchen table, surrounded by printed statements and forged signatures, I realized that my entire adult life had been built on a name that wasn't fully mine, that my identity had been borrowed, used, and carefully maintained like a second account someone else managed. And the most unsettling part was not the theft itself, but the discipline behind it. The years of practice it took to forge my signature convincingly. The consistency of small payments to keep accounts alive. The quiet intelligence of someone who understood exactly how long fraud could survive if fed just enough attention, and I knew then that this wasn't chaos. It was strategy, and strategies require decisions, and decisions have consequences. So I did what I had spent 6 years helping strangers do in my job as a paralegal in consumer protection. I documented everything, filed reports with the FTC, the police, the IRS, placed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus, and initiated legal action. Not out of revenge but necessity, because there is no version of healing that coexists with ongoing damage. And when I confronted my parents with a simple offer to acknowledge the debt and take responsibility, my mother refused to sign, choosing denial over repair, and in that moment the path forward became singular and unavoidable, because some decisions closed doors quietly but permanently, and from there everything moved with a kind of calm efficiency that surprised even me. Family members called with concern shaped by half-truths. My mother posted carefully worded pleas for sympathy online. The narrative began to shift around me, but I didn't respond publicly because truth doesn't need an audience, it needs documentation. And instead I built my case in silence, assembling evidence piece by piece until it stood on its own, and 3 weeks later at my grandmother's 80th birthday, surrounded by relatives who had unknowingly become witnesses to a story they didn't yet understand. My mother tried to reclaim control by framing herself as the victim, speaking about sacrifice and abandonment, but she didn't finish her sentence because there are moments when performance collapses under the weight of reality, and in that silence I stood, walked to the hallway, picked up the envelope I had placed there earlier, and set it in front of her, explaining calmly what it contained: legal notice, fraud reports, case numbers, evidence, and that the process had already begun. That this was no longer a private misunderstanding, but a documented case moving forward regardless of her response, and the room stayed quiet because truth has a way of settling into people without needing explanation, and my grandmother, who had seen enough life to recognize honesty when it stood in front of her, placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "You did good," a simple sentence that carried more weight than any argument, and after that the event continued in a strange, subdued normalcy. Cake was served, conversations resumed, but something fundamental had shifted, not just in my family but in me, because I had stepped out of a role I had been playing without realizing it. And in the weeks that followed, the system did what it was designed to do. Credit bureaus removed fraudulent accounts. My score recovered into the high 700s. Legal proceedings moved forward, and the chaos that had defined my name for years began to clear. And my sister, who had unknowingly been part of the same web of manipulation, reached out, and together we started rebuilding something honest between us. Not the relationship we thought we had, but a new one grounded in truth. And my father sent a short message apologizing and admitting he was seeking help, which I acknowledged without accepting or rejecting because some things require time to define, and my mother remained silent, leaving both envelopes unopened, one containing evidence and the other a photograph of my new home with a note that read, "You were right. You made me. I used everything you taught me to stop you," and that silence became its own answer. Not closure, but a kind of distance that allowed me to move forward without waiting for understanding that might never come. And 6 weeks after that birthday, I closed on a house with Daniel, planting roots in a life that was finally mine in full. Not borrowed or compromised. And as I stood in that backyard months later, watching the sunlight settle over something I had built honestly, I realized that being the rock of a family doesn't mean absorbing damage indefinitely. It means knowing when to step out of the structure so it can no longer collapse on top of you, and that boundaries are not acts of cruelty, but acts of clarity, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even for others is to stop participating in something that was never meant to sustain you. And if there is one truth that stayed with me through everything, it's this: reclaiming your name is not about destroying what was. It's about finally choosing what will be, even if that choice arrives quietly, sealed in an envelope, waiting for you to send it.